This is, in case you just wandered in randomly, this is the Portland Linux Unix group. Who has not been here before? Awesome. Oh, yeah, awesome. How did you hear about us? PDXLinux.org? Sweet.
Yeah.
And who else was new? Yeah.
I never miss an opportunity to troll a fellow kernel meeting.
How did you hear about it, though?
I think we were chatting about it last kernel hearing.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool, yeah. And when is that, by the way? That
was one a couple weeks ago, but no.
I did see it, but after it flew by.
They're scheduled irregularly by Drew Fustine.
Yeah.
When people aren't burying him in patches.
Who else?
It'll be one in a couple of weeks.
Awesome. Who else is new? Yeah, how did you hear about it?
I'm a student here. I walked past.
Oh, nice. Awesome.
Didn't have time to come
Yay.
in, but
Signage, plus. Okay, awesome. So we've been doing this for kind of a long time, so like 30 plus years, with brief hiatuses for viruses and things like that. And I'll come back to this in a moment. We have we had a hiatus on a thing called the Linux Clinic. Every month, third Sunday, we have a kind of an open house thing. People can bring in their Linux problems and we try to solve them for them. There's no guarantees. You're entitled to a full refund in case we can't do what we're supposed to do. We've been kind of swapping locations. This month it's going to be at the EcoTrust building. It's actually a Willamette University that hosts us from 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. It's second floor. I think the gate that lets you upstairs should be unlocked, and if it's not, I'll have another sign with a phone number you can text, and I will come let you in. Next item on our little list here is that we traditionally need speakers. We have a speaker tonight, which is awesome. We have a speaker next month, but after that, somebody, you might speak after that.
Well, yeah, I should. So, I guess part of my question is I have a couple topics I could talk about, but I'm curious what people are most interested in. One of them coming up that is kind of relevant maybe to people here.
Yeah.
Is secure boot and the expiring certificates that expire in a few months from now.
Oh, sweet.
That might cause a lot of turmoil in the IT industry.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So, if people just
That sounds good.
Yeah.
My advice to everybody has been just pick something you're kind of excited about because that's infectious and people. So that's good. And if you have any, it's like my full job in this role of coordinating is finding speakers, and it's always like 3 weeks before the thing, and I have no speaker often, or maybe even 2 weeks before. That's an uncomfortable place to be. So if you either want to speak or know somebody else who might want to speak, that would be super awesome, and to please get them in touch with me, and we can figure out a good time to do that. The other thing is we have, after this meeting, some of us go down to Patty's at First and Yamhill and drink various beverages and eat various things as your inclination directs you. So people here are welcome to do that. That's one we have a caveat is that's a 21 thing. So if you're under 21, that's maybe either you have to sit out on the curb, and that's there are some things coming up. Does anybody have any other announcements? I know that the Linux Fest Northwest is happening in April that some people from Plug have historically gone to.
Yeah, we're looking for carpool buddies. We got 2 slots in our car.
Right, so there's.
Yep. I got space for 2 people.
Are there other things that I don't know about that people in the Linux community might be interested in? Does anybody have anything? No? Okay. Well, in that case, we're ready for our speaker, and I will let him introduce himself.
Hi, let me get back on camera. My name is Stephen Hemminger, and this is actually a bit of a lie because this poster I'm not really talking about the good, bad, the ugly about OSs, but I just threw this up into an AI image generation and really loved it so much that I had to use it. And what was also really hilarious was I tried 4 different AIs, all came out with completely different things. Some were awful, some were completely useless, but it was just a fun exercise. And I guess that's kind of the backstory for this whole thing. So my origin story, if you go back, I first came to Oregon to work at Tektronix when they were in a failed attempt to make BSD-based workstations. And when that cratered, I went off to Sequent and worked for many years at Sequent doing parallel SMP systems that were primarily targeted at databases. And after Sequent, went on to Informix and a bunch of startups and ended up at OSDL for a few years. And then as OSDL shrank and shifted around, I went off to Viata, which was a startup. And Viata was a startup doing Linux as an operating system to provide network solutions. So basically an open source version of what Cisco does with their OS. We got bought out, a bunch of things happened. That's a bar story, but and ended up after Viata at Microsoft for the last 6 years, working on first the Linux team and then the Azure networking side. So you may not know, but pretty much every infrastructure at Microsoft now runs on Linux. And Linux runs on the SmartNIC that processes all the packets on Azure in every host. And so that was that backstory. And the open source projects, I first came into Linux working with the knowledge I had from Sequent, et cetera, working on the TCP stuff in Linux in about back at 2.5 days at OSDL. And at the time, like the first wave of people had come in and several of them had gone away, and there were several pieces of Linux that were just basically unmaintained. And because I needed them to do some of the things I did, I ended up picking up doing the bridging, some of the TCP work, and wrote this NetEM. And in order to make that all work, I needed to pick up the IP Route 2 utilities because I needed to add stuff, and it was the classic, if you need something and nobody's home, you have to do it yourself. And I put these all in gray because I found other people to take care of 90% of the gray things now. There's other maintainers, and IP Route 2, I'm one of the co-maintainers of. So that's pretty much the only actual utility that's active in Linux that I'm still doing things on. And back when I was at Viata, we were the networking front end. We needed to be able to basically process routes and switch packets fast. And the Linux kernel was not able to do that at the speeds we needed. And Intel had just done the DPDK project, so we were heavy users, early users. I got very involved with that. So that's why it's a little bit of bait and switch. Most of the examples I'm going to give are not Linux as an OS related. They're much on the DPDK side because that's where I'm still active. Although I'm officially retired, I still spend more time on open source now than I did when I was getting paid to do non-open source stuff.
Quick question, what's DPDK?
Data Plane Development Kit.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
It's about I was surprised to see how old we are. They sent out 20, we got the new official 15-year sweatshirts. That was the other thing. We needed things to put on the sweatshirts. So one good use of AI is if you ever have fun, just ask it to make up jokes, have it make up haikus, have it make up sayings, and it had great fun doing that. So if you ever need to put something on a t-shirt, that was good. So basically, I'm one of the co-maintainers of the DPDK, and I spend my time looking at submissions, refactoring things internally, and cleanups. So I'm not really working on drivers directly. So what about AI? Well, like every other open source project, we are resource constrained. So we have a huge backlog of stuff that hasn't get done, or patches that haven't gotten reviewed, or things that we really, infrastructure things we really wish we had. And I looked at AI as like, is this a cheap way I can get minions to do things for relatively low pay? Can they do some of the things that humans don't do very well at all? And you know, would this be a win? Was kind of the, and so the first one that was obvious is the documentation. If you look at documentation, documentation is usually done as the last step. Even when you're a student, you did your project and you wrote your paper afterwards, and you hopefully you had time to actually write the paper. And software developers are really not very good writers, especially when they don't speak English as a first language and they're trying to get something done for their company. And a lot of time it lags behind what's actually implemented. And you know, the classic Venn diagram is people who can write prose and the people who can write code don't overlap. And if you happen to be in the lucky quadrant, you're in the middle, you write papers in academia because then that's what you, so most of the people I deal with are over here on the code side. So AI proved to be actually really directly good on this. It's just a grammar checker and spell checker on steroids. It can go through and just like a careful editor, find repeated words, find wrong verb tenses, all those things that, it does a pretty good job of translating incoherent sentences back to something that would mean something. And if you're doing presentations, you get very fun making graphics. And it also does a good job of saying, does the documentation of this driver actually match the implementation? If you give it a few hints, like if you say you implement VLAN support, then there'll be these functions over here that support VLANs. And one of the first early things I've done it for is I get submissions like this, which you can figure out what it means as a human, but it doesn't read very well. So since the commit log is kind of the history that you look back 5 years ago, like what was this trying to do, running it through Claude or other AIs, in this case, you could get reasonable English out of it. And this is an example where it's actually humans could parse it. There was other ones where it was like 2 sentences and the AI was actually deep diving into the patch to figure out what was actually going on. Like this register was not set in this hardware and that's why we're doing it. So it was really, really useful. But AI is not very good at figuring out when the writing itself is the problem. It doesn't do a good job at like pass the grammar. And the other one that I've run into in several other areas is it can do a good job of reading some formats, but if you actually to produce them, if there's any, like, it doesn't really know like what a diff format is. It barely knows what a PDF is. It can read a PDF, but it can't generate a PDF. So a lot of formats are basically read only into AI.
I had a question that kind of goes back to the documentation.
Yeah.
With both of these. So what is the input? So if I'm documenting, say I want to do a man page.
Well, what I do is I take an existing document and say, throw it to the AI, give it a prompt, say, do a technical review of this, check it for grammar consistency and clarity, and to see if it matches the implementation over here.
So it's reading code.
It can actually, or a patch, which has both text and code. And it can read it to some level of understanding and say, it's somewhere like, as we all know, AI is somewhere between human consciousness and pure pattern matching. It's like a stage in between. But the other thing it does, though, with documentation, when you ask it to write something, it can get, we all familiar with AI slop. Like I was doing a patch series, and I asked it to write a cover letter for the patch series, which should be a nice 1-paragraph summary. The first version it meant was like a whole laundry list of everything it did. And I finally like beat it over the head and said, give me something shorter. What is actually this doing? And in this case, it was and I'll get to it later, but basically, tests are failing on my box. Here's the fixes to make it work on my box. And this goes back to AI's first response to anything is, oh, verbose is better. Which, is fine if you're a student. But the other one is, I started to look at this, and so we hired a contractor as a writer in our project to work on the documentation. And I worked with her, and she didn't have any real knowledge of the technical stuff, and she worked really hard to go through the documentation. And in fact, the starting point for many of these revisions was, she has done these things, we haven't finished the review, can you finish up the review of these documents? And I noticed that the human, well, you give them a document on how to run the command or how to build it, they'll go do it and try it. And they'll say, the output's different over here, and this argument is wrong. AI won't tell you that. And it never really suggests any kind of rewrites or reorganization. We had how to install guides for 3 different OSs, of which 90% were the same. So you had 3 copies of everything that had to be kept up to date. And an AI would just basically, you ask for it, I'll keep doing it. It won't even think about doing any kind of reorganization. So I don't think AI will put a good editor out of business. It may put spell checkers out of business, but not good editing. But the real one I wanted to do AI for was patch review. So we as maintainers like to have good code, done fast, and good responses to people. But we don't want to be spending a full-time job trying to keep up with it. And we're just a relatively small project. The kernel mailing list is famous for nobody can keep up with it. And the other thing is, a lot of times we get things where submissions are coming in like, here's the driver for the netcode NIC. I don't have the technical documentation for this. Some of it is even in a different domain that I'm really, so I don't have any knowledge of what I'm trying to review. All I can try to do is say, does this make sense? And so, kind of like, can we use AI to do that? So, as a starting point, there's a standard that the AI companies have started out called agents.md. I think GitHub started it, just like readme.md, it's markdown file. It's like, here's the text that AI agents should use to evaluate code. So the starting point for our project was, okay, I'm not going to sit down and try to write, it's like hard enough writing English or a language I don't understand, programming language I don't understand. So I said, can we take AI, say, let's take our existing documents on how to contribute to the project. Let's take our existing scripts for checking patches, the kernel coding style. Oh, and by the way, we have a mailing list. Like scan the mailing list and see whatever showed up in the mailing list. And there's also been various static analysis studios, PBS Studio, Coverity, and the feedback we get from them. Boil them all together and come up with an agents.md file. And that actually, a few minutes, came up with one. Started using it, and after a few refinements, was able to get it down. Well, what are those refinements? Well, obviously, first ones come up with false positives, and then the other one was sometimes you'd use it and it would tell you about real bugs, and other times it would not tell you about the bugs. So I kind of had to do a little telling it to change the text of what's important and what's not important to say, if it's used after free bug, raise it as an error, put it in as an error, rather than bury it as a hidden thing. But so we've come up with that. And now we can use this to take either directly, like go into the AI's screens and do it, or with a Python script, which it generated, or we're working on automation of it so that when patches go through and they've gone through the basic testing, it's automated. It goes through and looks at all these things and then comes out with a result review document. So this is the kind of thing we get. There was recently a patch patch for a new driver, and I ran it through, and of course it gave me the AF slop output that was this big. I said, get it down to the concise output to give back to the developer. And the reason I had to do that, it was a big enough patch set with enough things going on that I wanted to give the actual first, it's just like, a contractor with a punch list. You don't talk about the ding in the paint over there. You talk about the fact there's a hole in the drywall that's 6 by 6 in the corner. And so this is the kind of output we were able to get. And this is really useful, and it lets us get over that. Because to find each of these things myself would have taken hours, if not days. So it's really good at digesting these large patches quickly, and it can find resource leaks and locking issues that humans have to struggle to do it. Static analysis tools work, but by the time our process, these things are farther down the pipeline. Unfortunately, they don't get run too much later. And it gives actual actionable feedback to, in some cases, I've even taken it and asked it to generate the patch, to send the patch back to the developer. That worked. So I think a lot fewer bugs slip through, and it's able to look at code elsewhere. So if you have a pattern where you see a bug like this, you can say, look at all drivers and see where people got confused about pthread mutexes and when they were shared and not shared, and tell me what's wrong. Because you can tell it to go dumpster dive on either the web or GitHub or wherever, and it can find it. So I found that really useful. But you kind of are a shepherd on these things, because first off, it becomes overly picky. It really, it's like a dog. It really wants to please you. It really wants to find things. And some of those things don't matter at all. And like I said, it's too wordy, its response. And the last one is surrounding context. Sometimes it complains about something because it kind of looks like something else, but isn't the case. And there was recently a case where it complained about, it was calling close before free on this thing, and I had to point it at the code for, it was for a VM bus interface. Here's what the VM bus interface looks like. I don't think that's a bug. And it went like, yeah, I didn't know that. Okay, sorry. So a lot of that. It doesn't, so it basically looks at very what it knows and what it thinks, and really wants to give you an answer. But the harder part is AI review kind of works off like a blacklist or actually a block list or a bad list. So it works off, these are the anti-patterns I should find, and if I find them, I'll tell you about them. But it doesn't work on like a human does. Like I look at a driver and I say, does this driver do this new one do things in the similar manner that pre-existing code does? If it doesn't, then I look in, well, why is it doing? Is it because of the hardware, or is it because the developer came from Windows and did something totally different on Windows? Or maybe they just don't understand the system. And AI will just sort of say, you're using it correctly, not you're using the wrong thing. And lastly, it really won't ask for help. So when it's reviewing something, unless you really push it, it won't ask for, can you give me the context for this? Or what does this API do? Because I don't see it. It'll just sort of, because it works by staying on the tracks, it doesn't see the things around it. And like I said before, it does really well on surveying all drivers to see some condition. And I really think that's probably the biggest win as far as I'm concerned. Now, the other thing that I've run into is two classes of problems. The first one is the counting problem. Famously, people asked ChatGPT to add 2 + 2 and it couldn't do it. I think they special case edition now so that it works, but with your math homework it probably isn't. The one that showed up for me was in the patch reviews thing, it would complain that the copyright date was 2026. And I was like, And then I finally went back and forth. Oh, everything else it's seen before was copyright 2020. And so now it says 2026. That must be wrong. So I carefully worked with it to say, update the agents to say the copyright should be between the start of the project and the current year. And it still couldn't do it. It still couldn't do it. Finally, at some point, I had to basically demote copyright things down to info level. If you have time, go tell me about them. But the bigger one that was the person submitting it should work for the people, like, everybody copy pastes code in the DPDK project that came from Intel, but they're working for Huawei. They can't really go slap a Intel copyright on their driver. And AI really wouldn't pick that up without a lot of. I also mentioned before, a lot of times you're working in open source, you're passing around patches and diffs. It can take them in, but I have a real scattershot result on getting diffs out. Luckily, there's tools called rediff that will fix all the line numbers, but 90% of the time, patches come in with the wrong diff from AI. There's also what I call the Stack Overflow problem, which is AI reflects its training data. Its training data is years ago. This can lead to things like it telling you that's wrong because the API is that way. Well, it was 2 years ago, but it's not right now. And the reverse is true. It won't tell you that when somebody's submitting a patch against an old version with the wrong APIs. And the other one is a lot of Stack Overflow wrong answers can keep propagating into the AI mind meld. So
how does the AI deal with garbage in, garbage out? I mean, if the question you're asking is so precise and relying on a set of training data that is flawed because people poisoned it maliciously or they were just clueless and they gave wrong answers, how do you do?
The way it works is it gives priority to the domain of what it's recently seen with you. At least this is my interpretation of what it does. So if you've given it other stuff recently in the project, it will prioritize that. Like, we changed the API for how a test was registered a month ago. For a week afterwards, it was complaining about everything that was reviewed had the wrong API. After fixing it several times and putting it in, it's no longer complaining. So it does have a sort of, I don't know what the weighting or technical relevancy or time base. So poisoning, now, if you ask for something outside your domain of, can I tell this is right or wrong? Should I ingest this mushroom? I would not trust AI. Because somebody could have fed, snow-capped mushrooms are fine into the AI data. So it's really domain knowledge is your correction factor here. And this is why I use the analogy of I do woodworking. So when you work with power tools, you can cut things really fast the wrong way. But if you're careful, you can work way more efficiently. So I view like AI like a power tool. It can do the same thing faster, but it can do the wrong things faster. Which leads into the other one, which is everybody has this backlist of to-do projects. Things you never got around to. They were just too hard. But they're all things that would be cool. Other people would want to have them. And, the one I talked about in Japan, and I'm not using an example here, was the Linux version of bridging has a spanning tree that was in the version from 2001. The standard changed in 2017, and we still haven't caught up yet. BSD has it, other things have it, but nobody really needed it that bad, but we should be up to date. So that was one of the ones on the list. The first one I did the obvious thing was we have lots of libraries in DPDK that have no tests or pseudo drivers that have no tests. And I'm not asking for perfect tests, just a test, and it does a really good job of generating these missing pieces. And the other thing is, there were cases where like, okay, I needed to make add an enhancement to like the PCAP driver. I know something about PCAP, but I know nothing about how you get the MTU and BSD, and I certainly don't know the Windows API for it. It did. Could generate the little stub function, and it seemed to work fine for that kind of thing. And I'm willing to trust it if it compiles and it runs on that OS. I believe that it did the right thing. It's also pretty good at brainstorming ideas where you can kind of like throw it against the wall and see if it sticks. Write a program, write a Python script to go do this. You know, write a Python script to go mine the REST API of the Bugzilla database and tell me how many open bugs are per release, because I really can't stand the API that Bugzilla has to generate the chart, generate a Python program to do that. So it's kind of really good for quick brainstorming. But it really doesn't want to refactor something to do something new. I'll use the example of tests. After I added 10 tests, it was clear that 8 of those tests all had the same startup sequence that was copy-pasted into every one of those tests. But unless you prodded it, it didn't make, oh, I need to have a setup function. It should look like this. And it often will generate on the first pass stuff that doesn't compile or fails the test. Which is kind of like, you know, computer science 101. You compile your assignment, you run your assignment, you see that it fails before you submit it. So, but there's a famous 90-90 rule. 90% of the time is to get the first prototype, and the other 90% of the time is done to fix that prototype. This basically gets you the first 90%. And it's really just a novice programmer. I've gotten to the problem thing now, which even when I generate code with AI, I feed it back to the review prompt, and it finds things from its own review. It's kind of like when I was in English class, you write an essay, and you're supposed to proofread your essay. And the other one is they'll never tell you that's a bad, almost never tell you that's a bad idea. The closest I've got to that is when I asked it the first time to do rapid spanning tree in Linux bridging. It came back with, that's a hard project. It will require some plans.
Yeah.
Here's what the plan looks like. The second attempt was, BSD has it, there's the code over there at BSD, can we make something like that? Then it did a really bad job of translating it, so I guess. It also tends to generate brute force and ugly code. I'll pull up one example, but several more cases this has shown up where it generates something that will work, but that's like getting a C on exam. It'll run, but that's about all. And here's the example, that the last one. When I asked it to generate some code to do in IP route JSON support for some new features, it would go, there's this function inet end-to-p, I don't know if you're familiar with it, takes a buffer of data, makes it into a printable string. It takes an address family as an argument. It would generate 2 copies of that. And ditto the function to print something. We have a print in JSON that can handle JSON and to a file as different arguments with print all, but yet it generates 2 calls.
Does AI understand the subtleties of different licenses, like GPL
No.
versus? And so, what prevents people from creating stuff that does not apply to a certain context or stealing IP from other places?
I'll give you a really rough answer. The complex answer is talk to a lawyer. The rough answer is, if it's inside the open source domain, people feel free to derive from each other, not copy paste, but the same. So if the Linux code for doing a queuing discipline, it looks like this, and people want to do one in the other domain in BSD, as long as it's not a word-for-word copy, basically, because it's good intentions, people are going to be fine. Where you really run into problems is if somehow AI got a hold of the Cisco iOS source, it decided to leak out what their secure, encrypted whatever looked like, that would be bad. The reverse is true though. If I was working, and this big companies do worry about it, if you're working at like Microsoft in Windows, how do you make sure what AI generated code didn't come from something else derived in open source? So it's a real problem, but the fact is sharing among friends is okay. Sharing across the wall is bad. Just like it has always been, right? If a company that shall not be named took a driver that I wrote OSDL and threw it into their product, it did not give the source away. So yes, you can, when this happens, you can take it and feed it back to it and say, you're wrong. And it'll say, yeah, you're absolutely right. There's a much cleaner way that follows the existing pattern. It's like, this drives me nuts. It's like, why didn't you do that in the first place? The other one is that I thought of as I started to debug some of the stuff that AI was generating, can AI help with kind of the bug invasion? Can you take something that nobody's looked at and at least easily get started or get it fixed? And, can it really dig inside? And it turns out that for several bugs, you could just take a raw test log, run it into the AI, and it would come out with, the case that I was running into was the unit tests for DPDK. If I ran it on my 32-core little mini AMD box, the test would fail. But it was working elsewhere. And it worked in a VM with 4 cores. Just wouldn't work. So I just fed the test log. And it was like, yeah, this code here is not using the correct way of spinning so that this core is getting starved, or this test is taking too long. It ground right through all those things and did a really good job of picking up, this test is this code, here's this. So when it was good, it was very, very good. And when it was bad, it kind of went away. It's kind of hilarious when you see 5 minutes later that it's still hypothesizing it might be this. No, it's not that. It was kind of like it was stoned in a field, looking at the stars. And what was really rare, it would never, if you were a programmer, you do this sometimes yourself, mentally go up and spin while you're in the shower, but you say, what if I added 5 prints over here? What if I ran this trace function? I should at least get more data, right? I could tell, it would never really ask unless really prodded to say, can you trace this function? Can you give me the stack trace right here? So it's kind of, and when it was really bad was, it really didn't, it would see something where there would be one error in a log somewhere, or one error, and that was not that wasn't the real cause of the problem. The situation was like this tester failing, and it was because it would concentrate on the fact that when it ran in the container environment, it couldn't find this device, so the device printed an error message. And it would constantly dig its little brain in on that error message and didn't realize that there was something else completely outside that was going on. So when it was wrong, it was really ugly. The other one is often the classic, it's just like a student that says, put a sleep 2 seconds in here and the problem goes away. It's like, no, you don't understand. You need to go back to what's really causing the problem.
Question. Has it happened to you that you fed a problem to AI and AI came back with an answer that solved the problem, that was novel, but you did not understand? I mean, it was so brilliant that you couldn't go back to your past history, your knowledge, domain knowledge, and blah, blah.
In general, what I found with the really breakthrough, brilliant ones, are what gets me is the time it takes to have it do it is so blindingly fast that it would take me a month to 3 months, and I'm experienced in that domain, to go do something, and it would come back in 2 minutes. Because it was, a lot of it was template code. Like the classic one was, I asked it to make, it didn't even tell how or why, or make me a test for the Linux spanning tree protocol. Actually, this is a good example. I said, make a conformance test for the Linux spanning tree protocol. Wrote me a Python program. Big and huge Python program. Okay, that's cool. Let's run it. Well, first off, it was really ugly in places. It was going system echo 5 to sysfs whatever to set the timer. And it was like, you know, you can open a file in Python and you could write it. Okay. And the next one is like, it's still failing. You know, the value, it took me a while to figure it out. The value you're writing is actually in microseconds. And it went, oh, well, actually it's in centiseconds. I should have done it in centiseconds. And once it did that, the test ran. So after a day worth of correcting it, the test ran. The good news is that was a good, useful test. The bad news is it really wasn't a conformance test. It was basically an API test. But to get a test of all that and then be able to put it in would have taken me at least a week, maybe a month, and to have it work very fast. But rarely is it a breakthrough in terms of something I would never have thought of, but you know, creatively using VETH devices and bridges and joining them together to test the protocol is something that would have taken me, you know, a day to draw in a napkin, you know, a long time to actually code out. And I'm not a super Python coder either. That's the other thing is I find domain knowledge in this stuff is very variable. So it's really good at Python, fairly good at C, probably not so good at kernel stuff.
So if you have an esoteric language, AI will not be able to
If
create
it
something.
doesn't, if it's not in its trained data set. That's why it's going to do pretty well at CoDel, because there's masses of CoDel it can train on. But if you know you asked it to do some academic paper thing in Haskell, how much?
Influx DB SQL.
Yeah. The other one is if you really feed it a big task, it kind of like gives up. So look at the DVD patchwork backlog of 400 patches and evaluate all of them and give feedback to the maintainer. I appreciate your ambition, but I need to be straightforward about what's. This is AI saying no.
It's so polite about it.
At least it said no instead of just disappearing off the mailing lists for 6 weeks.
So anyway, the results about this doesn't really save time. I kind of just want to go skiing and not do this stuff, but so it doesn't do that. Am I better off? Yeah, I actually am better off. I feel more entertained by interacting with AI than I do sitting there typing at the editor all day. Is it higher quality? I think it totally is, because the number of, loose ends or dereferenced nulls or, stale data handles, a lot of that stuff goes away. So I'm actually happy with it, but I don't think it's, if you want to read more about how industry's changing with AI, I'd say the most recent one I saw that was really good is the CTO of Microsoft wrote a good paper about how junior contributors should be involved with AI with senior contributors, to basically changing how the start of career engineers will work. And I thought that was really interesting. And I think this kind of matches my experience. So.
I have two questions. First is, do you think that AI makes you the 10x more productive engineer that everybody aspires to be? So you are an expert in your domain. Does this power tool make you go faster, or like you said?
I'll use the analogy of a really good skilled woodworker. if you use AI, you do not magically become the Japanese craftsman that's able to build a screen of interlocking parts. But if you use AI, you can be like the YouTuber who's building a really nice thing of cabinets with joints, and you're doing it on a weekend, and it's going to look good. Now, whether that person, so I don't think that you're going to change a 1x programmer to a 10x programmer. You're going to keep the person at the same level, but let them work in faster and with better precision. In other words, you aren't going to see the person make the breakthrough of, oh, I just built a brand new learning app that works great on your phone. But you are going to see the person make, here's something that could take your grocery list and send it off to Instacart and do this and make this come back, and I built it in an afternoon. So a lot of things that are mechanical and take a lot of effort, AI can do, but it can't really do the breakthrough. Now, other thing I have done, though, is I do find brainstorming is very useful. Like I can say, what if this? What would it look like? And it's like, yeah, that's easy. Here's what it would look like. Or in the project, we have several things that I'm not sure how much they're used. So I ask AI, say, look at GitHub, see which projects are using which API, these APIs. And there was one recently, like we have a built-in hardware support for special NICs that have built-in regular expression hardware. There's one NIC that was built that way. Nobody uses it. No projects use it. But trying to prove a negative as a person is really hard. But asking AI, look in GitHub, does anybody use this? And it'll come back with, no, nobody's using it. So that's.
And the second question I had was, do you think that AI can help you learn? And so,
Oh, yeah.
If you are really smart at asking open-ended questions, could you pick up a skill fast?
Oh, yeah.
By simply using it as a
Yeah.
training partner?
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, yeah. And plus, if you think of it, everybody's been using Google that way for years. It's like, tell me how my shower valve works because it's leaking. Well, it's kind of a nuisance, and it takes you a half a morning to figure out that it's this brand of shower valve and it's leaking this way. But AI in 2 minutes can tell you, oh, I saw the picture of this valve, it's this valve, and I looked at all these sites, and this is what goes bad, and this is the part you need. And the same thing's true in software. It could be like, oh yeah, I use this game, and every time I use this game, this crashes. Like, oh yeah, I searched the forums, and this is this, and this is this, and it's going to be patched next week or something. That kind of thing.
Did you mess around with any of the local models, and how did they compare to?
I have not.
Okay.
The problem there is, I think you could, but it's a problem of getting enough data in. And to be honest, some of the best data comes when it's beyond the model you have, right? Like the fact that glibc is generally used across a bunch of projects. It understood that what pthread mutex was, and it understood some of the core teachings, like the difference between volatile and atomic, and the different types. It was pretty good at it. So.
And I also had some of my input. Since I'm required to use for AI for work now, my own experiences with it, when I try to ask AI to write something that's like well beyond my capabilities, I have no clue where to start. I'll often find that it can just see me garbage doesn't compile or something.
Yeah.
I don't know how to ask it to fix it. But when I ask it something that either just is very tedious to do, or something that I have to do a lot of research, read through some API docs and stuff, it can just very quickly collect all that and give me an answer very quickly, and boom, it works. And if it doesn't quite work, I know how to kind of guide it to the fix. And the other thing you were asking about surprises, there was one thing that did surprise me on one of the things I asked to like refactor this little piece of code in the file, and it found like a page down, it also said, oh, this line needs to be corrected, and it was a comment. And I looked, well, sure enough, the comment does not match the code, it's an outdated comment. And it corrected the comment to match what the code is actually really doing right now. And it spotted that, I didn't even notice that, it's like, oh, perfect, it's now.
Well, actually, I take that back. That was a similar kind of thing, which was, there was a bug in, of all things, the test for the topeless hash, which is a function used to take a certain amount of data on the start of a packet and come up with a number that is then used to decide what queue to process it on. Hashes are filled with Galois fields and all this other stuff. And it went through it and was like, the math's wrong here. It was like, what? I mean, it didn't surprise me that it could figure that out, but it was not in my domain of knowledge, and its domain of knowledge. So it's not like a super smart person. It's like he's got a math degree and I don't. That's what it's like.
Did you find? Oh, sorry. So, do you find when it generates code, like for Python, like generates Python or whatever, is it kind of a write-only kind of a process?
No,
or
not
is
really.
It actually like is it actually like readable, legible code?
So, one other one I did was we have this script which we inherited from. So it's a wrapper script, a shell script, that runs the kernel's Perl check patch script with a bunch of flags, and then has a bunch of post-processing steps, each that were added on incrementally using awk and whatever. And so it's a script that takes a 20 patch thing, can take 4 minutes to run. And I asked it to make a Python program. It made one Python program full of regexes. It got 90% of the answer right the first time. And then I would feed it back, oh, this is a false positive, or you missed that, and it would go juggle it. And it wasn't like it was right only, it was more like I wasn't gonna go dig in the details of figuring out the exact regex to match a trailing statement on the end of a line that has an extra bracket, or a return statement with an extra parentheses. It's like, yes, when I saw the code that it wrote, that was obviously the right, but the effort to go and figure that out yourself as a human is harder.
But the script made, I mean, after you kind of corrected it, the script actually made sense as much as anyone can wrap their brains around.
Yeah, I mean, it was basically this huge table of, if this regex emit this thing, if this regex emits this thing. So the code itself wasn't hard to read, but the inputs were.
You're talking about using an AI to do this sort of work. Which one?
So I made the 90% of the stuff I do is with Claude, because it's I paid for it, B, it tends to generate the best results. But the review script that can run against any of the models. And for obvious outputs, they're pretty much the same. The words are different. For stuff that's mostly correct and you're digging into the deep weeds, there's different outputs. And in fact, there's a wrapper script that runs all the AI models that you have, that you happen to have keys for, on the same patch, if you feel like burning some API tokens.
Did you notice that was helpful? Like, did you find like a group of models that were useful, or?
Not really. I mean, it wasn't. I don't think. I mean, I decided to build that one just because it would be useful to have. Not that the data. It's not the right. I mean, maybe there's some future point somebody will write a paper on it, but it seemed like that's a useful thing.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering exactly. That was like, because I know Claude was pretty good at RSTP
Yeah.
and things, but I was wondering if you were using any other models that kind of like.
Well, I also discovered that depending on reviewing, if you gave it the higher order models, you got better results if it was a complicated thing. So that did correlate. You know, if it was like somebody set a patch to add 3 new IDs into a device driver ID table. That's a no-brainer. It's like, yeah, do they look right? If it's like, oh, I'm getting this new driver that has this, this, and this, and it's got, you know, three layers of indirection, and I mean, that's the other one that AI is really good at that humans have a hard time doing, is tracing call paths across libraries. Yeah, you do that when you're debugging something, but it can do it a whole lot faster than you can do it. Oh, you're in the back now.
All right, so I wonder, have you experimented with using AI models and LLMs for like large-scale experimentation? Like, for example, I want to take XFS, replace its core B-tree algorithms that have been there for 30 years, and replace all that with an LSM tree. Let's see how that goes. Like,
So the one I'm holding off for the next release is kind of, but much milder, which is, so in the DPDK, we have this concept of kind of like kernel module parameters. You have a device and you want to give it some configuration. And of course, every single device wrote their own processing of these and the strings related to them. And it's like, just give me a general set of functions to do and refactor all the code to go use those functions. So just like the kernel folio work and some of the other things, yeah, it would be really useful, kind of that kind of refactor ordering. But if you wanted to change, I guess you would do it, but you wouldn't know whether, it couldn't tell you whether the result would be better or worse.
yeah, like I would only, at the moment, I would be interested in being able to make proofs of concept.
Right.
Like, well, if you switch it to this, then you'll get this general class of different performance. The implementation does not have to be rock solid because it's just an experiment.
So the other experiment I'm doing, I kind of cut things away to try to get the talk, is, so the DPDK has what's called the tap device driver, which is basically take packets inside the user space library to inject them into the kernel. For various reasons, the version of the tap device in DPDK is overly complex and overly a mess. And there's a relatively new kernel async IO method called IO-ring. And I basically said, can we do a better job of that same solution using IO-ring? And I had kind of started one by myself, but ended up pitching it to AI to finish, because it was better at figuring out this has to be canceled there, but this, and so that worked. I think if you were doing that experiment, you'd be better off to kind of give it here's the container I want you to put the box in, rather than letting it.
Right, trying to give it at least some structured walls somewhere.
Right. Yeah. You had your hand up?
Oh, yeah, you may have answered my question, but I was wondering if you had much opportunity to compare results, say, between different releases of Claude or whatever.
No, I haven't. It would be worth doing, but it's kind of like.
Are you just waiting for that new version to come out, or
Not
just
really.
anticipation?
The other thing is, I'm more worried. To be honest, at this point, I'm more worried about the reliability and the cost. So the reliability, where 1 out of 10 times it just gives up the ghost on something, you have to basically backtrack.
Yeah.
Or if you start to do something bigger, like when I was playing around with rapid spanning tree stuff, and try to put that in, I would regularly bump into token limits. And if the size of the new code you're putting in is bigger than the token limit, you're going to be like, so then you have to figure out, how can I put just part of the code in there at one point? Like, the first one I tried to do everything, including the tests and the documentation. I said, no, either just write the code first. Don't worry about the other stuff. So and the other thing that bugs the crap out of me is that it doesn't want to, how can I say it? There's a trade-off in cost. Like, when we wrote that agent MD script just recently, like, I was going back and forth before we put it into being an automated tool. It's like, how can we prune it down so that the other scripts we're already running that are running reasonably aren't in that prompt, because we're paying per token. So if we can take a few thousand tokens out of that are perfectly reasonable and give you reasonable results, like the one that says you should have a copyright at the start of the function, and it should, and it gives you a nice output, a better output from a human interface point of view, but the fact that we have to pay for it every time we do an automated review.
You're like gotten the bill and saying, whoa.
No, what we did was.
Or you set a limit
So,
or.
DPDK project is under the Linux Foundation, and we have some limited budget, very small, like most open source projects, a small, that basically covers our summit, which is going to be in May in Stockholm, and it covers like a few other things like the cost of the weekly meetings and stuff like that, and that the board approved a small budget of AI. You know, like, I think $1,000 or something like that to be spent, you know. And it, you know, it's like anything else. If you give your kid a budget, you don't want to burn through your budget on the first month buying beer, right? So trying to figure out how to be most efficient is another challenge.
Oh, okay, so you're parsimonious with the usage of
Yeah.
this, yeah, okay.
So-
Two questions.
Go ahead.
One follows up on yours. Could you have Claude write a series of test cases to compare the different versions of Claude to see what the
Oh yeah, there's a compare reviews.shell, and you
Oh,
can
really?
tell,
Oh, really?
you can tell which models you want to run, and you could do either different providers or different models from Claude.
Then you could compare the versions. But
But-
the other question I have, which is probably more interesting, you mentioned a lot about like domain knowledge, and it sounds like you're doing a lot of lower level driver stuff. So I was kind of curious if you've seen it work or used it in a higher up in the stack where you might have a project that has like half a dozen different programming languages combined with maybe half a dozen different markup languages, and you've seen how it handles that level.
I'm sure you could do it.
Variety versus.
I think you just, like anything else, you run into token limits.
Okay.
And, you know, and like you say, if you've got some weird language, you know, like some companies have their own weird.
Yeah. Oh, I was thinking like in terms of web development, right? You might have JavaScript, but also
Yeah.
TypeScript, and the difference may not be obvious.
Yeah.
You know,
Well,
so-
then you run into the question of how well can it translate between the incoming thing into JavaScript, into HTML, into the back end. And
So there's more steps to go through.
Yeah.
More tokens. Okay.
So I just, this is all second or more removed, but I heard an anecdote where somebody was like looking at a new library and he pointed AI at it, and the AI found a bug, and then he said, oh, well, submit a pull request, or a patch and a pull request, and the pull request touched 200 files in the project, apparently edited out the donation request thing in the README, and it just got submitted. And then he said, "Oh yeah, take that back, close that."
I think that's apocryphal. But I think that
I have a
200,
witness.
200 files is perfectly possible because
Yeah.
it has no sense of
Yeah,
scale.
yeah,
The
yeah.
donation request one, it doesn't use unless the person added it to the prompt.
Or it was unnecessary for some reason.
I don't know.
Oh, we don't need this.
Yeah, this is, so I don't have direct knowledge, I will say.
Yeah. That's the most important thing.
Any other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
So just for context, how long have you been using this?
9 months. I mean, I'm sure students in here have been doing it for 2 years, but, you know, it's like, oh, let's give it a try.
You mentioned that the Linux Foundation has given you guys funds to use AI models to help you with your projects. Do you find that the AI models have actually been a benefit for your project? Or?
We've only started, I've only started letting this out the door since November.
Okay.
And right now it's basically, I did the agents thing. I run the reviews on stuff, and Aaron is busy off automating. Aaron Connell, who's not here, obviously, but he's busy off automating it. We have the UNH IOL runs all the back-end tests, and then some Intel runs some of the other ones, but basically, kind of spreading it out. And the other one is on the IP route side. I don't know if you're familiar with the kernel side. Chris Mason has done something, if it's on GitHub under review prompts, which has the review prompts for kernel patches and systemd patches, and I added one for IP route patches. But the first two are automated. The IP route one is not automated yet, but eventually the goal is to get that automated as well. Thank you.
Any more questions? So,
Thank you.